Hello silver friends, this is Joli from QuickSilverHair, and today I wanted to share with you the ingredients that I avoid in hair care products. As many of you know, I failed Curly Girl Method, and Curly Girl Method has quite a few rules on ingredients that you shouldn't use. So I've had some questions about what ingredients I do use and which ones I avoid. One of the most popular blogs on my website is on this topic, and I'll link that below so you can come back to it as a reference point. But I wanted to discuss what I avoid, what I don't avoid, and why. In Curly Girl Method, you are to avoid sulfates, silicones, drying alcohols, oils, waxes, mineral oil, heat, styling, brushing. I'm losing track of how many things you're to avoid now. But when the method very first started, it was basically sulfates, silicones, waxes, and drying alcohols. The problem is when you read an ingredient label, you might not know what any of those things are or what's what. And it's very confusing now when you pick up a bottle and it's free of gluten and free of phthalates and free of silicones and free of sulfates and cruelty-free and free of blah, 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 blah. So I just wanted to share, after getting some questions about me failing Curly Girl Method, I wanted to share what ingredients I avoid. First thing I avoid is sulfates, and I avoid them mainly because they are drying and stripping. There is some evidence that they can contain components that do cause problems for the human body, and I won't get fully into that today because that's down a rabbit hole we don't have to get into. But the main reason I avoid sulfates is because they're too drying. They're way too drying for my silver thirsty hair. And when I have tried using products that do contain sulfates in them, I have to follow with deep conditioner in order to combat how dry my hair gets. The next ingredients that I avoid are silicones, and I don't avoid all silicones. I avoid all of the cyclosilicones because they are environmentally unsafe. And I avoid all silicones except for shampoo soluble dimethicone. And for instance, Loma brand has their dimethicone is shampoo soluble. Because I use shampoo, I'm not worried about it when I do expose myself to a shampoo soluble silicone. I will also allow water soluble silicones in. Those are silicones that are prefaced with a PEG and then a number. Those will wash out, they don't build up, and as long as they're at the lower end of an ingredients list, meaning that they have a lower concentration, I'm not that concerned about them. I 100% avoid amodimethicone because it actually straightens my hair, so that's not usually my goal, so I do avoid that one completely. I avoid gluten for health reasons, and for my skincare and everything, I've found that skin and hair care products with gluten don't generally bother me, so I'm not really hyper aware of that. But for the most part, the products that I do reach for that are silicone and sulfate free are often gluten free, so it's not a big issue there. I have begun to eliminate using any products with fragrance or synthetic fragrance because many of you know I have an allergy to that. So it is getting easier now with great products like Scene's whole line comes fragrance free. And then I also use the Loma line, which is naturally scented, so there are no synthetic fragrances in there. That also allows me to avoid phthalates because phthalates are a fragrance preservative. So by avoiding fragrances, I'm generally going to be avoiding phthalates. The other ingredients that I tend to get really careful about are glycerin, because I live in the high desert, and I will link below a post on dew points and why glycerin can be troublesome for those of us who live in a dry climate. Glycerin is not something you should have to avoid, so be very clear on that. Unless your hair is sensitive to glycerin and gets frizzy when you use high concentrations of glycerin, you really don't have to worry about it. But the case in point is that not all glycerin is the same, and not all formulas are the same, because I have glycerin in my hair today and my hair looks totally fine. So I'm trying some new products and they list glycerin. I chose to go ahead and try them. I chose not to avoid trying them just because they had glycerin in them. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised. So there you go. The next thing I'm really careful about is proteins. The larger the protein molecule, the more it causes my hair to frizz, dry out, and straighten. So it's just something that I learned doesn't work that well for me. Now, smaller protein particles like amino acids and peptides don't seem to be such a problem for me. So I don't avoid proteins 100% of the time, but I know which ones to avoid. So for instance, I avoid soy, I avoid wheat, which that's part of gluten, so I would avoid that naturally anyways. And that seems to have been a game changer for me in having more consistent wash days. The next ingredients that I look for on a label and try to make sure that I don't allow into my hair care routine are dyes. Now, there are several types of dyes that are used to color the product itself or to be toners for your hair. So, purple shampoos and conditioners have violet dye in them. Blue shampoos and conditioners have blue and sometimes a violet dye in them. And I don't avoid those products per se. I don't use them very often simply because I don't use purple shampoo very much. I do use a purple conditioner occasionally, just for when I need to do a detox or clarifying process and I haven't done one in a while. I might grab my purple conditioner to help until I can get to doing a QuickSilverHair mask. The next thing that I would say about dyes is they're sneaky. You have to watch for dyes in all of your products across the board, because I have, with doing consultations with clients, found dyes in the weirdest products that would be, why is this even in here? I have seen yellow dye in heat protectant, so watch that one. Dyes are usually listed at the very end of the ingredients because they are usually in a very low concentration. However, I have seen dyes in the middle of the ingredient deck, which means that they are usually a higher concentration and will likely stain your hair. So I avoid dyes to avoid staining. I think it's imperative to start paying attention to the labels in that regard, especially when you're using something like a heat protectant that has red dye in it. Why would it have red dye in it? I don't know, but I did have a client recently that her hair was turning pink, and that was the culprit. It was her heat protectant. It had red dye in it. So that's one that I have learned the hard way via my clients that we should be avoiding. Again, purple, blue, if you're using those for toning your silvers, that's fine, but you want to look for the red, yellow, orange dyes to make sure that they are not in your products and discoloring your hair in that way. Many people avoid polyquats. The problem with avoiding polyquats is that polyquats are a set of chemicals that may not have much in common, because the name of a polyquat is given to it by its rank in the list. So if it was Polyquat 71, it means that that was the 71st polyquat added to the list. So its characteristics may not be the same, say, as Polyquat 11 or Polyquat 69. So it's really about kind of looking at if you start to notice that you're getting a lot of buildup, and if you have curly hair in particular and you're starting to see it get weighed down or frizzy, you might want to look at your products and see what the concentration of polyquats in those products is. So then we go on to alcohols. I don't avoid alcohols because normally the alcohols that I'm being exposed to in my products, the products that I choose to use, are moisturizing alcohols known as fatty alcohols, which are not bad for your hair. Drying alcohols are usually in high concentration in like hairspray and so forth, that you want it to dry quickly. Whatever you're putting on your hair, you want that thing, hairspray, gel, whatever, to dry quickly. I naturally avoid those products because I do reach for curly girl safe products. However, I do use Giovanni hairspray, and it does have SD alcohol in it, and I've never noticed an issue. However, I don't use hairspray on my whole head all the time, every day. I use it to set a certain style once in a while, and that's it. So I don't really avoid it 100% of the time. I think one of the things that happened when we were told to start avoiding drying alcohols was it was the 90s, you know, and the 90s we were using a ton of hairspray to set our styles, and many of us were people coming out of the 80s using, you know, a can of Aquanet, which, yeah, that was very drying. So, yep, you want to avoid those drying alcohols in high concentrations. But to set your style and just have your hairstyle stay for the day, I don't think it's a huge issue if you're not using a whole lot of it. And there are some products now that are for like hairspray and so forth that are alcohol free and are easy to get and attain. So not a big deal to avoid that one. I do watch for staining oils. I look at oils like hemp, olive oil, any oil that's really highly concentrated color in nature. I look for those in products to make sure that those won't be staining my hair. And usually if the product itself is white, once it's been finished in its formulation, I don't really worry about it. I hope you found this video helpful and useful to you. What works for me might not work for you, and what works for you might not work for me. But some of these ingredients are worth avoiding so that you can actually tell, especially if you have curly hair, what your curls need or don't need. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and until next time, shine on.